Give it a second.
Yes, you can start.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar, Third-Party Risk Management, presented by I myself, Wamaitha Mwangi, the GRC analyst at ICRAL Innovation Hub. GRC basically means the governance, risk management, and compliance analysis that helps most businesses to conduct or achieve their objectives. Today, we'll have a session on third-party risk management, mainly the basics that we need to know, we need to understand, so that we can help businesses or even our organizations to be more secure. The agenda for today is I'll introduce what the third-party risk management is, its importance, how you can develop a framework, a stroke playbook structure that will guide your organization on how to conduct this. This is not a definitive or the recommended framework, it's just an example. One must come up with a framework that is tailored to the organization's objectives or goals. And lastly, we'll have the conclusion where I will allow a Q&A session for us. So karibuni sana. So what is third-party risk management? Basically, this means the identification or the assessing and the controlling of all various risks that can develop over the entire life cycle of your relationships with third parties. And what third parties are those companies that you outsource for their services so that they can come and help you conduct your businesses in your organization. For example, buying printers or even the internet that you use, or even things like where you order things from the digital ocean, where you would store your things there. So what you have not developed, but you have outsourced that service so that it can help you become effective as you conduct your organizational objectives. But how do these third parties bring about risk in your organizations? The risk exposure begins when organizations give the same third parties or vendors access to their facilities or networks and data. And mainly it is done with less care and concern than they reserve for internal staff. So imagine when a third party is compromised, your organization can experience devastating effects, for example, financial, reputational, and the same. And even though that party has made the mistake or is otherwise responsible, your organization is the one which is going to be held accountable. So in other words, the service that the third party is providing can be outsourced, but the risk is for your organization to own up to. So these consequences these risks that they bring to our organization should be properly scrutinized by the audit team in your organization because so that you can give your customers or clients the confidentiality of their data. So what are third parties? These are parties that your own company or are any non-customer entities that you've established a relationship with to outsource certain operational functions or products or services. Basically mean that as long as you have not developed that service or that function in your own company, you are going to outsource the same service so that it can be onboarded to your organization. Knowing what third parties are and what TPRM is and how they bring or how they expose us to risk as organization, we have to understand what is the importance of a TPRM to any organization. What is going to be the advantage or the benefit of a third-party risk management framework to our organization? Number one, consider the big impact that it can have in case something goes wrong. Imagine the financial fines that you may be fined. How many slowdowns are going to happen to your operations in case something is breached or data is breached. Consider the reputation and the integrity of your company. What will people say of your company out there, and what technology and information is now going to be changed because of that breach of data or something. So having a TPRM framework in your organization will help you cover some of these impacts positively, because if you're able to know what the risks are and what you can do about them, financially will be secure, your operations will go on, your reputation out there will remain intact, and also there will be no data breaches, if I may say so. The second benefit of a TPRM, it answers the big challenges that most organizations go through. For example, if you lack resources, the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform a risk management, you're going to now be informed that you need an audit team that is going to perform all that so that they can cover you securely. It also gives you more knowledge on how to conduct businesses. Instead of just trusting a third party, you will trust, but also verify whether they do have let's say, secure policies in their organizations. There are also multiple processes to evaluate, from procurement to onboarding of third-party services, and also coming up with communication strategies. Do they have a contact person? Do they have service level agreements with someone and the like? Are they able to comply with various data protection laws? For example, in Kenya, the newly enacted, the 2019 DPA Act that was enacted, are they also able to follow what GDPR says if it concerns them? Also, the third benefit of a TPRM, it is for the greater good, basically. Because it holds organizations, it holds those third parties, the vendors, those contractors accountable to good risk management practices. Are they able to withhold the law? Are they legally even formed? Are they who they say they are, and all that? So considering that this is the importance of a TPRM in an organization, we are now going to go to look at developing a framework for TPRM for any organization. And this, I was guided by the various standards that we use, the various standards that we use in IT. For example, the NIST, the ISO, and the CIS. They really have good documents that outline how a third party or risk management framework should be guided or should be developed by organizations. So the first thing in a playbook structure is determining the scope and the governance, of a third-party risk management model. That is, the executives have to set the tone from top to up and make sure that there are policies that will be established so that we can give these third parties, we can show that these are the policies they're supposed to follow. We must also develop service level agreements. How are we going to communicate with one another? How are we going to onboard this service? How are we going to work with one another? Also come up with vendor compliance standards or even acceptable vendor controls so that when they come, we can minimize the risk exposure to our organization. Another important aspect of governance is also bringing about termination of contracts in case they do not comply with our policies, with our guidelines, and with our internal controls. So, and then determining the scope of what you need to onboard in your organization. What do you need? What services do you need? What functions do you need? What products do you need to bring into your organization? After mapping out the scope and the governance issues around it, identify now the third parties that you want to onboard in your organization. So ask them for know where they are located, know if they are legal to operate, define the relationship of the third party to your organization, and in case of any changes, always make sure they are listed. Once you have mapped out the scope, come up with the policies, and you've identified third parties that you want, now it's time to have a training and an awareness session or sessions where you're going to inform third parties of their responsibilities towards the organization, and also train and make aware your internal clients, that is your staff or your employees, of what they're supposed to expect from the third parties. And some of these onboarding requirements may include, do your employees know the solution that is going to be onboarded in your organization? And also another question you may ask is, to have a catalog of everything they do, the business hierarchy, how they do perform in the organization, how do they deliver their solutions, functions, and all the rest. These are some of the questions you can ask third parties before onboarding them, or even make your employees aware of what they are supposed to expect from the third parties. So the first playbook structure point is first mapping out the scope of what you want to onboard in your organization. Is it a service? Is it a function? Is it a product? Then the governance issues surrounding that, establish the policies, the guidelines, and the internal controls that will guide the operations between your organization and the third party. Then identify the third party that is legal, that will comply to all those governance issues that you will give them. And lastly, having a training and awareness sessions for both the third party and the organization. Now, after you have done all that, we go to the second segment of the playbook structure, which is now having or developing a risk registry for the third parties. Now you have identified who you want to onboard to your organization. So you really have to come up with a risk registry or a risk assessment method that you're going to perform or audit that party before you actually absorb it in your organization. And how do we perform a risk assessment? You first identify all the risks that are associated with the service, the product, or the function that they're trying to onboard in your organization. And risk identification occurs mainly in 3 points. One, strategic, how to identify risks strategically, operational-wise, and project-wise. This means that when you're talking about strategic risk identification, how will that third-party service affect your business strategy, your objectives, and your execution? Are they going to change or have an effect to what our clients or what the organization wants? Are there any legal changes that we'll have to look into before we onboard them? And if there are any technological changes, if we are supposed to change something within our organization to accommodate them, how much exposure or how much risk are we exposing ourselves to? And the personnel that will come to onboard that service or function or product, who are they? Are they knowledgeable in their work? Another way to identify risks is operational-wise. This is how risks are identified when dealing with the operations, and who is concerned or who deals with operations. These are the team members. Who exactly is going to onboard that service? How is the hierarchy developed? How is the communication channels between the third party and the people concerned with onboarding that service? What policies, what internal processes and systems are going to be used so that that service or product can be onboarded? And also, are there any events, let's say, if it's a remote service or a remote solution, something like that, or something that a solution that is outside of Kenya, how are we supposed to comply with the laws, considering we have the DPA and the GDPR? How can we marry them so that we cannot abuse or disregard any law? And the last way to identify risks so that you can come up with a TPRM is the project risk. You have identified the solution. So how is it holistically going to affect our organization? Let's say, for example, if they do handle data, how is data, our internal employees' data, is it safe when we expose it to that third party and such like things? So according to the risk registry, we have identified all the risks using these methods, and now we go to the risk analysis, that is trying to determine which risk is more critical than the other so that we can give it more attention before it is onboarded. That is, you develop a priority for the risk. If it is going to affect our data, if it's going to affect our information, and we have Data Protection Act, how much fines are we going to pay in case we are breached or we breach a law? So you should consider all the aspects of the risks, analyze them properly, and then rate them or prioritize them according to your organizational business objectives. Another important aspect of assessment is also rating. What I was saying, giving risks a priority according to what your business objectives are for your organization. Lastly, for a risk registry assessment method, we must identify how we are going to treat or advise the risks that are going to be identified and analyzed by our risk assessment method. We can treat risks mainly using 3 ways: mitigation, transferring the risk, or even accepting. This will give us or will show us what is our risk appetite in case we onboard this third party to our organization. And also risk treatment should be shared within the people who are going to use that solution, and also the third parties themselves, and hold the third parties accountable so that they can address the identified issues. If there is a breach somewhere, they should be notified so that they can comply or they can try to cover that breach or the same thing. Also, treatment gives us room to make sure that everything is being done according to the policies that have been developed, according to the controls, according to the guidelines that an organization have been developed. So in essence, the risk assessment method that we are going to perform or audit the third party provider with, we must ensure that their security policies match to what our organization wants, so that we can be on the same page security-wise. So after coming up with the scope, with the governance, and also performing a risk assessment to the third party, we go to the last segment of the risk management for third parties, which is monitoring and review. This is usually a continuous process, because in IT, things change overnight. We cannot say that because we have developed policies or we have audited them, that we just keep them on the shelf now, that is okay. Things happen, and it will require for the audit team to always look into changes, to always update in case a legal thing has happened or a new law has come that we must comply with. So in monitoring and review, we need to know our limits. For example, most even third parties outsource their solutions so that they can onboard it to most organizations. So if they include a fourth party or a fifth party, we must have a limit. We must tell them that this is where we want, this is where the line is for any solution to be onboarded. So you must require third parties to divulge information about fourth parties, about fifth parties upfront, and for the life of your mutual engagement. The fourth parties and the rest will be subjected to the same policies and the procedures as your third parties, so that you can be secured in your organization. Another limit that you should consider when developing a TPRM is the geolocation awareness. You must know the exact geolocation of that party system so that you can can know which laws are going to be used in case of compliance analysis. Also monitor, by knowing geolocation of the third party, of the fourth party, you're able to monitor significant geographical events that may impact your operations. For example, if the internet goes down, who are we going to blame in our organization? If there is a breach, how are we going to handle it? Who are we going to contact? Are they available within this location, or do we have to make so many calls, so many bureaucratic calls to reach them? Also maintain a list of all the geographies where a system hosting, where a service hosting, or a product hosting is not allowed or is allowed, for example. So another way to monitor and review most third parties is having an incident response plan in case of a breach. This is mainly defining the procedures, the IR procedures for handling breach events. If there's a breach of information, is there a team that has been dedicated for that IR management, let me say? Also, in IR incidents response, we must systematically and always monitor third parties in case of security compromises. We must ensure that the policies they signed up to, the guidelines they signed up to, the controls they signed up to, or the laws that we follow for compliance are followed to the letter to avoid security compromises. Another way to consider, another thing to consider in IR is also maintaining a list of conditions that are not allowed to be present in third party. How are they able to handle their security incidents? How can they affect us? We do not want this condition to affect our organization. And also in IR, tactically engage third parties to always triage or even make sure, make sure that they triage any dangerous conditions that may affect our organization, and also commit themselves to performance audits once in a while, so that we can know of any incidents that may or may not happen, so that we can be prepared for such breach events. The last one is stakeholder engagement, stakeholder communication, which is very important. There must be a communications team, there must be a communication strategy in a TPRM. Who is the first contact when a third party wants to onboard our organization? Which is the hierarchy that will be involved? What communication channels are we going to use? Is it the phone? Are we going to text? Are we going to call? Are we going to use email? And even if we are using emails, should they secure or non-secured? And how are we even going to have meetings? Is it via video conferencing, face-to-face meetings, and the likes? So for a recap, we have learned how to define what third parties are. We have defined, we have been able to see their importance in any organization. And also we have been able to develop a basic or a definitive playbook structure that will include the scope and the governance issues surrounding our relationship between the organization and the third parties, coming up with the policies and the same training employees, training the third parties, and making them aware of their responsibilities to each other, identifying which third parties we want to onboard into our organization, and also the compliance issues around them. We've also come up with how to do a risk assessment on the third parties. How do we identify the risks that they are going to expose us to? How are we going to rate or prioritize the risks? And how are we going to treat the same risks? And how are we, the third point was monitoring and response. Is there a dedicated incident response team in case a breach happens? How are we monitoring these third parties? What conditions are they supposed to meet before they onboard to our organization? And also, do you know the location or the laws that apply to that third party? And also, what's your limit according to the fourth party awareness and the fifth party awareness? So basically, ladies and gentlemen, that is how we conduct a third party risk management or develop a risk management framework for organizations. And now I'm going to conclude by inviting any questions that anyone may have. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Kilel.
Thank you. Do you have a few words to say?
Not much really from me, but thank you so much, Omaita. I've really appreciated this session, as it's among the few that people think that they understand. At the same time, there's so much detail to it that you've shared with us. I don't know whether you can do another part or two for the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's a lovely one, really.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And anyone else with a question? Stella, Laura, Fraser.
This session has reminded me that I needed to give you a call regarding some questions I had on CRC. But thank you so much. I think I'll sidebar you later, if that's okay.
Okay, no problem, Laura.
Maybe I think that's it, Omaita. Thank you so much.
So, karibuni.
Yeah.
Okay.
We hope to have a second session, Omaita.
Yes, no problem.
And at least Maria said she'll reach out to you. She's found a niche that she needs to focus on in cybersecurity.
Sawa.
Yeah, I thought the session was well explained. It was actually easy to follow because
thank you.
Yeah, so step by step. So I have posted it on Twitter and social media pages. So the people who missed out can go and recap on the live stream. But thank you so much again for coming. This was nice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to the participants. Thanks for attending. I think we'll end the session early today since there are no questions. And there's a comment from Walter, great presentation. The second session should focus on the sample checklists.
Yes, noted. Thank you, Walter, for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll just say good night. And
good night, everyone.
Good night, all.